What's going on, everybody? This is the Blockchain Backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we're going to take a look over here at the Bitcoin price chart, which sits at about $110,000 as we kick off September. As we kick off our new month, of course, we get new monthly candles. One of those ones we've been watching a lot over there has been the Bitcoin dominance, which, of course, we got a big red candle there for August. But the intriguing thing we were waiting for would be the new oscillator prints over here on the Bitcoin dominance, which we've now gotten. We officially have the cross here on the moving average convergence divergence, or the MACD. We got it to start there in August, but boom, now it's certainly in effect here for September with the stochastic RSI pointing straight down, again hinting at a favorable environment for the altcoins versus Bitcoin. But as we start the new month, we've got a lot of things to look at to see if we can have an optimistic September ahead of us, or if Bitcoin's going to pose more problems. You may have caught some of the posts that I put out over there on X throughout the weekend. Many of you likely saw the newsletter that was posted as well on the weekend to mark off the end of August over here on Substack. But as we head into the new month, a lot of these dynamics that are happening in the equity markets are going to be things that have implications here for the cryptocurrency market. Maybe even a little bit of what's going on over here with gold, which still has some of the drawings on it from Markets in the Morning, and we'll elaborate on this as well with what's happening with gold and what's happening with Bitcoin. But the clear market dynamic that we're looking for as we head into September is to be able to see the Russell 2000 to be able to continue shifting its way upwards. I've made some pretty strong statements in the past. I've made some strong statements in this past week, and even there in the newsletter, that we can kind of kid ourselves all we want on what's the main driver of Bitcoin or the main driver of the altcoin market, but it all stems back to these equity markets. And in particular, the altcoin market is heavily influenced by what's happening over here with the Russell 2000. And if you caught my post over there showing that the Bitcoin price is heavily influenced by the NASDAQ, S&P, and Dow Jones. So as we head into September, the big watch is to see, of course, can the Russell 2000 actually get an escape into a new all-time high and finally get the altcoin market to be able to escape with it? Do we see somewhat of a rotating equity top happen in the market, where the big players of the game are not the Mag 7 or the S&P, Dow, and NASDAQ, but rather we see a catch-up play happening in here for the Russell 2000. To give a little context of this picture that you're looking at right in here, in the candlesticks right over here, this is actually Bitcoin. In these blues and purples in here, you have the Dow Jones, S&P, and the NASDAQ. Down in here in the reds, well, your green is going to be your Russell 2000, and your red is going to be the altcoin market. Do you notice anything in here? And it's just very clear as day to me that we've had Bitcoin's price action behaving like the mega caps, just like we saw over there in the stock market, right? Your Nvidias, Apple's, Microsoft's, Facebook, Google, and then your altcoins acting like the rest of the market, where this whole market's been propped up by just a handful of names in the equity markets, and this market's been propped up by Bitcoin, right? It's that same type of dynamic. And what's been fascinating about the mega caps is that they are actually two range levels ahead of what the equity market is, right? Here's the peak of 2021 for everything: Bitcoin, S&P, NASDAQ, Dow Jones, the altcoin market. Here's the 2022 bear market. Here's the recovery. Notice, here's the range escape. Then all of these come back to backtest the previous range peak. This is your tariff crash, right? Next, they all go on, and then they take out that range peak as well. Yet, at the same time, we still have the Russell and the altcoin market still stuck back in our previous range way down in here. So as we head into September, it's unequivocal, or without any doubt, obvious. We need to see the Russell be able to continue to work its way up and be able to actually get a real escape in here, as we have both the altcoin market and we have the Russell both battling against that 2021 all-time high still. And we need to finally see a range escape happen in here for the rest of the cryptocurrency market to gain any type of momentum. I wrote about this in the newsletter, that these types of ideas, of course, produce a lot of cognitive dissonance on a lot of different people because they attach themselves to narratives. If you watch this channel a lot, you probably notice that I poke fun at a lot of narratives, and it doesn't matter. Even if, like, my largest holding is XRP, I don't have a problem poking at a lot of the silly narratives surrounding XRP, because it's just sometimes copium, needing some type of justifications or reasons to attach onto something outside of liquidity flows happening in broader markets. But the data is unequivocal to show that these are related, and that our most important factor here is to see that we can see the Russell 2000 actually go for a true escape, and that there becomes some form of a rotation that happens between these two where we can catch up, whether this pulls back and this catches up to it, or this pulls back and retraces and this catches up to it. I'm not quite sure, but there needs to be some type of catch catch-up play that happens in here with the Russell, and it's going to bring crypto with it. And I think I talked about this in a video last week that people will say, oh, see, the crypto market can't do anything until Ethereum breaks out. Duh, that was always the circumstance. Or my argument is, was it really Ethereum or is it really the Russell 2000? And that the Russell 2000 breaks out, that of course brings the mega cap along with it in the altcoin market with the crypto market, and then brings the rest of the altcoins with it at the exact same time. So it's like everybody look into Ethereum or like look into Bitcoin, then look into Ethereum. But the cold hard reality is, do we all just look back and say, actually, this is what's it? And my thoughts are, without a doubt, that's what we're looking for here as we go into September. But a lot of questions still remain on whether or not this is Bitcoin's top, or if this is just another large ranging context where we went and swept the highs over here at 124,000. We've pulled back down into these ranges, and then we're going to try to swoop our way back up. That, of course, would argue that what we've seen in here is still just a continuation of these things where they just keep producing smaller ones and smaller ones and smaller ones until you finally hit bubble territory. As I discussed on X throughout the weekend and I wrote about, you have a very difficult judgment call to make on that with where you are right now. As I wrote in the newsletter, does this continue to be another expanded flat correction like we've seen so many times for Bitcoin? And frankly, you can even argue the double tap, bull flag, breakout, short squeeze, violent backtest, V bottom for the OGs of the channel who have seen that so many times. And as I also wrote about this weekend, examples of that include where we double tap here for Bitcoin, then bull flag with a short squeeze, violent backtest, V bottom. We saw that with the Dow Jones back in 2020, right? Double tap, bull flag, breakout, short squeeze, C19, violent back test, V bottom. We've seen that in Ethereum in here before. Double tap, bull flag, breakout, short squeeze, violent back test into the bull flags, V bottom. And so technically speaking, with where the prices are for Bitcoin currently right now, you could argue that you are still within that right now, with the prices not dipping below $105,000, that you are technically just sitting right here in the middle of both of these bull flags. Should price go plowing through these levels in here, I think we have a pretty strong argument to say we're likely through the top of Bitcoin at this point. And that the context that we've been looking at Bitcoin through for the past several months would be that, hey, we've already actually gotten beyond this point in here. If we start plowing down and getting through 105, that we're likely going in for an A leg happening in here, followed by a retracement, then followed by probably a deeper plunge, likely below $70,000. I have had people ask me in Markets in the Morning, and I've seen it posted over there on X, that, hey, we're just going to head down to $94,000 and then we resume the bull market. I think you can obviously clearly tell that my thoughts are, if we head down to $94,000, I don't think that we go back into a bull market, but that we can go as high as into a retrace and then head on down into a true bear market for Bitcoin. But in the event that we actually do plow down in here into $94,000, $95,000, the obvious thing that I'm going to be watching for is what happens into a retracement in here. And where does the Bitcoin dominance end up landing in here now that it's finally started flipping into bearish momentum clearly over here on the weekly time frame, as we've been showing over here for weeks now, that it crossed through 40 and it's just dancing down in here, that we could probably see that Bitcoin dominance continue to fall into an environment like this. I posted about that on X as well. I believe I brought this up in a video last week too, that we saw something similar like that for Bitcoin back in 2021, that we saw the initial breakdown of the Bitcoin dominance happen into the final push of Bitcoin. Still, even as Bitcoin fell off of its peak there in mid-April into late April, we still continue to see that Bitcoin dominance continue to make a smaller fall. And then, of course, as it went back into its retracement there for the preceding 2 to 3 weeks, well, the Bitcoin dominance went and finally collapsed and went and found its bottom as the altcoin market made its final euphoric surge. Now, if you were to try to draw that same type of parallel to what's going on with Bitcoin currently right now, well, what do we see? We see the Bitcoin dominance begin to fall in here as we go for the last push to be equivalent to being like right here during all of this stuff. Then we have the initial fall off of the peak. That ends up starting right here, right? We still continue to see the Bitcoin dominance fall off of the peak. Then if Bitcoin, comes down and it goes back into some type of retracement in here, to still be able to see that continued fall happen for the Bitcoin dominance as it goes back into some type of retracement. So those are still viable. Again, I just showed you this idea right here to say this is not invalidated, that you could be doing something like this where it's just really throwing back into the bull flags after the short squeeze happens and then it just violently heads right back down. You know, believe it or not, when we take a look at the Russell 2000, that's even what has happened in here on this really large time frame. That I can take all of this off in here to show you, right? What is this? ABC, and then you have a couple of bull flags right in here, right? What does it do? It breaks out, right? Then it has its short squeeze, and then it violently pulls back right into the bull flags in here and finds support in here. Technically speaking, that is exactly where you are right now when you look at it through that lens for Bitcoin, that you're still just right within those price levels, right? So structurally, hard to make a judgment call at this particular moment, but I've seen people say if we're going into the 90s or we're dropping below 105, we're still in a bull market for Bitcoin. My thoughts are we're not. My thoughts, of course, will be that if we start seeing that plunging price action happen below those levels, that we've already completed all these things that we've talked about for the last several months. And really, it's just a waiting game to see how does the crypto market respond into an environment like that. And that's probably the danger zone, but it would still be like a place where the retail crowd could potentially pour in and get very excited about. And I know that sounds weird to say right now, but that's just what they do if it becomes a rotational market, right? Because that's what rotational markets look like. And if we get a rotational market happening into the Russell 2000 and Total 3 is escaping in that moment, while the NASDAQ, S&P, and Dow are all stalled with Bitcoin, well, then there's your catch-up trade, right? And could that happen to a retrace? Of course it could. It happened in 2017 and in 2021. But those are all based on the idea that we would actually be beyond that, right? So long as we hold here and so long as this still remains, I mean, you can still hold on to that, right? So everybody wants to say, well, make a definitive judgment call on whether it is or it isn't. And it's very difficult to do that in an environment where we're in right now because it could technically hold. And the Russell 2000 could technically bust out any day this week. And you clearly see the Bitcoin dominance losing its momentum, and you see all of these monthly indicators going kerplunk on themselves to say, hey, things don't look as bad as people may feel it over there on X. And with where you are, you could unquestionably still just argue this, so long as these levels are holding right in here at 105, and that what you've seen so far really places you kind of like being right in here on a much more miniaturized version of one of these, which we speculated that's still in the cards. We've said that for months, that those types of things can continue to happen in here, that you would be in something more like that you were likely still holding these lows over in here, but then you had your throwback happen, and then you had your plunge, and then now you're just kind of waddling, which would imply still that there's potentially one more swoosh to come scare everybody. And who knows how long that could take to get there to swoosh and scare everybody. But then, of course, you just go on and you reverse it and you do it all over again. And I think those are still in the cards. They're viable so long as you're still holding on top of these price levels, because you have a tremendous amount of previous resistance turned into support, and you still have a structural support level to hold that we see plenty of charts to be able to hold those. So long as you're there, I personally can't argue it's going to go one way or it's going to go the other unless if it breaks. If it breaks in here, then my thoughts are, hey, we've entered into the bear, but there's lots of different phases of a bear. We have the initial pop of the asset, you move into a rotational environment. Then after you move into a rotational environment, then everybody still holds on to hope after that. It falls. They say, oh, no, it's not ending. It's not ending. And then we move on to capitulation several months down the line. But really, you could still just argue, again, it's just another repeated one of these things like we continue to see. And it's done just that, as we speculated on the channel multiple times, that it's always possible that could occur again right in here. Go hit 124 and do that. But we're just going to have to wait and see how Bitcoin's going to react in here, what this is going to look like, right? Because the reason we're talking all about this is just trying to say, all right, well, what type of environment do we have to look at through the lens? At least when I come onto the channel, I have to say, well, how am I looking at through the lens? How am I going to communicate it? And what my thoughts are. I have to decide whether or not I'm viewing it through the lens of the bubble is completely done or the cycle is completely done for Bitcoin, or am I going to have to view it from, all right, we're going to produce a parabola. And then once we start very definedly seeing 5 clear, distinct waves escaping into a high, it could all just pop together and there is no retracement later thing, right? Like Bitcoin dominance ran with it. It went at the exact same time. We may not have a retracement play that happens if we do that. Like in 2021, remember in the second half, there wasn't a retracement play that ended up happening. So right now, it's a lot about watching that these levels end up holding and giving the decision on whether or not the top of Bitcoin is in And we're going to be doing retracement plays, which I think the crowd doesn't believe in, which is, typical of tops. I see a lot of posting over there saying, hey, going to $94,000 is healthy. Baloney. No, it's not. That's the end for Bitcoin. But I'm also not entirely convinced it has to happen. I just think if we got through these levels in here, it definitely increases the odds of it occurring. But I think it's also still very viable that it could just still be holding. And that's really just kind of where we're at today as we start off September. And that, how the picture can change. It can just be one thing one day and then euphoric the next day. And all it would take is a push over here in the Russell. And to say, you're 5% away from the all-time high on Russell. All it would truly take is that. And euphoria completely and utterly smashes through the ceiling here in the cryptocurrency market. So the moral of the story is looking at Bitcoin is trying to be like an indicator of whether or not we're going to see total 3 really just kind of come out of here as speculated, and that it's actually not going to get very far. That the crowd may come pouring in, but it will actually be very short-lived. Or if we're going to end up seeing a parabola come and it's going to get wicked exciting. So we're kind of just waiting on this range to be able to tell us the story on what that's going to look like. So all eyes on that throughout the rest of this week. Ethereum, again, another sign on why those altcoins look so much better than Bitcoin in general, just the altcoin market, which is why I think the Russell is going to poke up there, is this behavior of Ethereum. We've got all the same stuff happening in here that happened for Bitcoin back in 2020 with a crash, retrace, reaccumulation met by an extreme event that happened. This, of course, is your C19 crash. This is your tariff crash, right back to the peak, likely just creating a running flat. And then I like I just said, I think these things could bust out of here with the Russell 2000 at the same time. And I try to do you guys a service by showing you this stuff with the Russell and all of that, because this is such a narrative-driven market and storytelling market when it's very clearly a liquidity game of broader markets. And so if we get this, again, it'll still be about watching the Russell and how it ends up behaving. But I think the Russell and I think Ethereum are giving a telltale sign here. The altcoins are probably going to be okay, but it's questionable if this is going to be an ending parabola on Bitcoin or a retracement on Bitcoin. And we'll just have to let the price action continue to play itself out to be very definitive on any type of conviction in that. And that's one of the reasons why we talked about the Bitcoin dominance earlier too, is to keep an eye on it. It's not crazy to think it could happen like that for a Bitcoin dominance versus the price of Bitcoin, but we'll monitor it closely to see how it develops as time goes on if Bitcoin does dip lower. Now, of course, one of the things that is always fascinating is that relationship between gold and between Bitcoin. We've talked about this many times throughout the past. What do you think could possibly be happening in here? Well, of course, you've got gold shuffling up, and what happens when gold shuffles up? Bitcoin goes down. So you, of course, have gold trying to poke above this range, unsuccessful yet, a little bit of a blip there. But then you have Bitcoin, of course, going down to the south of this range, right? The inverse relationship between these two things when they're moving. Now, the thing that intrigues me is that I'm actually not convinced that this is a real, true, full-blown breakout for gold. I think there's a very high likelihood that it's actually exactly this stuff that we talk about in here, and that what you're seeing is the short squeeze for gold. An example of that, for those with recent memories, of course, was just like with XRP that happened back here in 2024 into early 2025, where it's really the same thing. Final parabola, and then it goes for one last push, one last short squeeze, and then it rolls over on itself. And reality is gold might have a decent size ways to fall down after it does that. So you look at that, of course, with Bitcoin, you say, are we doing a full-blown trajectory change? And, you would argue that if you thought gold was going into a full-blown breakout from right here. Like if gold was ramping up and like going to go shoot to $7,000 or something right now, or at least if you thought that's what was happening, then you probably likely would want to be really convinced that Bitcoin is going to actually break down, because gold doing that is very dangerous for Bitcoin, and history proves that with data. But if this move that's happening here for gold is very short-lived, and this is a short squeeze after a double tap, bull flag, breakout, short squeeze, like so in here, bull flag, breakout, short squeeze, right, then you'd be very concerned of some type of violent backtest to come back for gold. I don't say this as a hater. You guys know I'm a precious metals lover. Shout out to silver. $40 make you holla. But on a structural chart like this that has these, with these violent backtests, the breakouts and then the short squeezes, that is very commonly what comes afterwards. Right. So if you thought it was like going for $7,000 or something crazy like that, then, I don't even think this should be on your bingo card. It should be that, boom, this thing's going straight down. But I'm not convinced that gold is actually going for a full-blown breakout. And all of this stuff that's drawn on here was all drawn during markets in the morning's live streams. So this could be very temporary here for gold. So we'll keep an eye on that too, right? And so that also leads you to the thoughts of saying, well, be convicted, pick a choice. Well, as long as you're in these price levels, which just gave plenty of examples of showing you that you're technically okay when you're in these price levels, and all these discussions in here about how you can short squeeze it to go for the final push over here for gold, you still don't have anything. If this was like a technical setup that was going to be a full-blown blast out of here and it was very clear as day, I'd have zero problem saying, yeah, that's it for Bitcoin. It's done. Look what gold's about to do. It's about to ramp and charge out like crazy. But I just don't think that's what we're seeing. I think we've actually seen all of this happen here for gold. And this is actually your short squeeze final push followed by the bigger back test coming for gold. So I actually think it'll stall out after it just gets a little bit higher than where it is right now. Otherwise, things like Ethereum, of course, we talked about this. This is that running flat happening in here. Nothing's changed in here with these dips. It's still just heading sideways in here. Similarly, that environment happening back in here, back at the high for Bitcoin back in 2020. Again, likely needing that total 3 and that Russell 2000 to break out at the exact same time. And then just a decisive action over here for Bitcoin. I haven't seen anything over here on the XRP price chart that has gotten me in any way excited. I don't see any signs of strength happening in here by any means. For the past several weeks in markets in the morning, and I believe in a video last week, of course, we looked at that example of what happened with Cardano back in 2021, where it attempted to escape through that high and then failed and just waddled. People have asked me in markets in the morning what would be things that would get you concerned about XRP would be, well, if we just kind of continued to waddle happening in here, which we have continued to do. We got hit with the appeals being dropped and the case being officially over at the literal 702 retracement on there. And this thing just kind of continues to shuffle along happening in here. So things to kind of watch out for on XRP is really this price level here is pretty important right in here at about $3.05 to $3.10. If we see this market ramping up and getting really exciting and XRP is just completely incapable of breaking through those levels, then it would likely become a concern that, hey, we hit our maximum excitement. There's something going on under the hood suppressing this thing. You have Ethereum pushing, you have Binance Coin pushing, but something's going on in here. Alternatively, to not give you such a gloomy and doomy picture for XRP, what are the things that we just did for Bitcoin for months on end, right? What are all these discussions we've had in here for Bitcoin? Then we go take out the high, then you ABC, all that stuff in here. Heck, we of course talked about that with gold too over here, getting above those highs. Then after taking out those highs and ABCing off of those highs, it can recover, right? It can recover. You can of course make that argument happening in here as well. It just seems that if the price starts breaking down below 265 and starts drifting down in here into the 220s, 230s, 240s, things like that, it just becomes a really hard structural setup, at least for me to see what that setup is that is super bullish. It just won't be obvious to me by any means. So if we actually are drifting into some type of ABC in here, then, where would you kind of look at yourself as being? Well, that you've already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're working on 5 right now, which would create you an entire A, B, C correction, right? Which, looking over there at gold, right? Those are all the things that we do have. And then you, of course, sweep those lows, sets in panic, sets in worry, and then the thing marches on. It produces its bull flags and it's off and away. But right, what are the things that we also see in here as well as we see those prices are able to very clearly and definitely get their way up. We want to see the price be able to not just get back to 210 or 310, excuse me. If we see it get back to 310, there would be literal zero excitement for me at 310. None. Because it still opens that door that it's still just going to struggle right in there. And it could be a big problem. But exceed that 310 and start getting up there into, 330s, 340s, 350s. Hey, man, the tone changes drastically. It will look like it has just been an ABC off of the highs after sweeping the highs that we see so often here in this market. So, right, just hanging out at these lows while Bitcoin is likely doing the same thing. The big, I think, telling tale over here on XRP is really going to be what happens back here at these price levels between 305 and 310. Get through them and escape through them really rapidly. Then we open those doors up for those bull flags. And then you all know how that goes, right? Because we've seen it so many times before. In the meantime, the name of the game is waiting on Bitcoin to give some definitive price action happening over in here. And hate it or love it, your precious altcoins tied to liquidity flows throughout macro markets and waiting to see what happens over here with the Russell 2000 throughout the week. That's the main thing, telling thing, of course. Watching what happens with gold. So we kick off September with some intriguing data over here on the Bitcoin dominance. We'll wait to see how Bitcoin's reaction continues throughout this week. And of course, we're sitting there with a hope and a prayer on that Russell 2000 to give us a breakout at some point this week. And it will likely, I could pretty much put all my marbles on it if it did. Take the altcoin market with it. And so that's the big wait and watch for this week. Otherwise, here we gotta go. The first time in several years, Bitcoin dominance is cooperating. But all right, that's going to be it for this one, you guys. Welcome to September. May the heat of the summer be passing you by and the cool fall weather be kicking in. Thank goodness. I'll catch you guys tomorrow on Markets in the Morning. Again, like I mentioned, throughout the weekend, I posted the new newsletter over here. It's a little bit of a longer one. It's got a 35-minute audio recording over here at blockchainbacker.substack.com. I record all of these after I write them. Altcoin market cap races to historical all-time high with a Russell. Russell surges with Dow Jones, Bitcoin teeters, Bitcoin dominance rotation, and one big trade. There's a link down here in the description of this video to blockchainbacker.substack.com. You, of course, get access to this one and all the past newsletters over here at Substack. But on that note, guys, I will check you out tomorrow in Markets in the Morning. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor, but if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.